Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kiran Sidhu speaking, co-founder and CEO of Halo Labs. Joining me today is Andreas Met, my fellow co-founder and our chief operating officer. We returned from Lesotho about a week ago together, and I'm going to first start by going over the press release. After I do that, Andreas and I are going to answer a bunch of questions that came in via email and through our IR people, Colin and his team, Colin and Todd. And then after that, we'll open up the floor to questions, and then we'll answer what we can get to in a timely fashion. Okay, so to start, what I'd like to do is just go over the press release. This was a significant, if not the most sort of significant event in our history since we did the RTO. So we completed the signing of a definitive agreement to acquire Bophelo Bioscience. November 27th is when we announced it, that we've entered into an agreement. And it's a proposed acquisition of 100% of the equity of Bophelo Bioscience and Wellness in exchange for 40,786,667 shares of Halo. We only have one common class of stock currently authorized, and that is what we used. Located in the Kingdom of Lesotho, in Southern Africa, Bophelo has the country's largest licensed land area for cultivation of medicinal-grade cannabis products. There is also, along those lines, we currently have a 5-hectare fully licensed canopy. And we have conditional approval. It seems like I'm getting some static. Let's see. I hope, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think your phone is a little muted, so if you garble, muted.
I'm gonna try to call in with my cell phone. This is computer audio. Sorry, Kieran.
All right, no problem. Okay, sorry about that, technical difficulties. So, we also, in addition to the 5 hectares of fully licensed greenhouse canopy, which sits on approximately 8 hectares that we lease, we have conditional approval to expand to another 200 hectares of licensed outdoor canopy. And we expect to start exporting cannabis grown in Bophelo in Q2 of 2020. In total, once fully implemented, it's our belief that the 205-hectare Bophelo site will be one of the largest cannabis cultivations in the world. So going to the acquisition highlights, upon closing of the transaction, Halo would have secured a fully licensed 5-hectare, which is 12.4 acres, cultivation site with an operating nursery, which is currently operating, and preparation underway for the construction of 5 1-hectare state-of-the-art forced air greenhouses. We're using Cravos, which are designed in Canada and being built in, I believe, Australia or New Zealand. Then in addition to that, we have 200 hectares or 494 acres of conditionally approved outdoor canopy under a lease option from the same trust that we leased the 5 hectares from. For the mass cultivation of medicinal grade cannabis. We have access to ample water, power, and labor in a clean, dry, and safe growing environment with an average of 200 days of sunlight a year on the land we currently lease. We have a fully licensed export business, and we have potential access to European, Israeli, and Australian cannabis markets today. Our phase 1 growth plan is the completion of the licensed 5-hectare greenhouse cultivation site. And what that is we've put together a couple of bullets around that. And the first one is what we've been doing is developing our local genetic strain bank, which is continually undergoing evolutionary improvement. We have a first harvest planned of up to 1,000 cannabis plants expected in Q2 2020. and full production across all 5 hectares with all 5 greenhouses installed by the middle of 2020, which is Q2. In terms of our phase 2 expansion plan, which is the long-term development plan of a 200-hectare outdoor cultivation zone, we have the land rights secured under a lease option, and we have conditional approval from the Lesotho government, from Lesotho, for doing or conducting outdoor growing. In terms of project funding, Ms. Mogella, on the 27th, our chairman-to-be, and currently the chairman of Bophelo, funded a $1 million loan to initiate the phase 1 growth plan. Further to that, Bophelo is in advanced discussions with several large commercial banks in South Africa to fund the phase 1 growth plan. And we expect conventional bank financing to be secured around Q1 2020. We're also in negotiations right now with European, Australian, and Israeli licensed cannabis companies for the import of medicinal grade cannabis. We've engaged a firm out of Malta, Pharma Consulta, to help us with our European Good Agricultural and Collecting Practices, GACP, and to help expedite our certification process. And we've already scheduled the quality control sites visits to Bophelo. At current sales prices across our target export markets of around $4 to $8 a gram versus our expected production cost of less than 50 cents per gram, we think that right now there's significant room for both profitability as well as revenue from this project. Export sales under our license are expected to commence again from Bophelo in Q2 2020. We're really honored to be welcomed into the Kingdom of Lesotho and look forward to considerable prosperity there for decades to come. And we'll talk a little bit about our vision there a little bit later on, a little bit more through the Q&A. But Lesotho is rightly regarded as one of the leading jurisdictions globally for cannabis companies to operate in. The climate that we're in supports perfect growing conditions of up to 3 harvests a year. And the Lesotho government has been at the forefront of the international push for cannabis legalization. The Mafeteng region, where Bophelo is based, has in place all the necessary infrastructure and a skilled agrarian labor force to sustain large-scale agrarian activity. Once we're able to develop the 205 hectares fully, our ambition is to help the government as well as the trust that we release land from to transform the Mafeteng region into a global powerhouse of cannabis cultivation. About Bophelo, Bophelo Bioscience is based in the Kingdom of Lesotho in the Mafeteng region. And Bophelo is a holder of one of a limited number of operational licenses issued in Lesotho for the production and export of medical grade cannabis product. As the largest licensed landholder in Lesotho, Bophelo's 9-year license allows it to cultivate, manufacture, import, and export cannabis products. Situated approximately 70 miles from the capital city, it's about an hour drive of Maseru. Bophelo's operating site is an ideal location with ample labor, abundant free water, flat land, and low electricity costs. And the climate is very favorable given the high altitude and low humidity, which provides a clean organic growing conditions in a pristine mountainous region. With over 200 days of annual sunshine, we can support up to 3 grows per year. Delving into our phase 1 growth plan, we have been active at Bophelo since the summer of 2018. We've had one of our top growers, James Bowman, there. And most recently now, we brought our head grower, Michael Forney, there. And we're bringing another one of our top growers, Ole Christensen, there in next week. So we're deploying significant resources on the ground there. And we're actually putting some more people on the ground there as we're moving people from Oregon and Nevada to Lesotho. we've been overseeing various infrastructure work where we've been digging irrigation channels to capture rain and to divert rainwaters. We've been we've been reinstalling the catchments, which Andreas will talk to, for the water supply. We have the power grid actually put up to the back of our current 8-acre property, of which we're putting up 5 hectares of greenhouse grows, and that the amount of power we have will allow for all our future, right now, our future expansion. As we said, we lease currently what we call under canopy in US speak 5 hectares. It's a cultivation site. We lease from the Mufudi Matusu Development Trust in the town of Tasahalo, where we're based in the Mafeteng region. We have plans, and we have ordered one already of the 5-hectare state-of-the-art forest greenhouses that are built and customized for us. And we're going to be putting all of them in place over the coming months. And that will enable us to get our first harvest out by the end of Q2. What we've also done is established a proprietary genetic strain bank. We have not been able to import clones like we normally would do, or babies or teenagers. So we've actually popped seeds, and we've been doing that now for the last 6 to 8 months. And what'll happen is, with each of our harvests, our genetics will get stronger and stronger as our strains continue to strengthen and improve and adapt to the local environment. We're targeting strains both high in CBD and THC, because we do not have that sort of wall that other companies have, where you have to extract CBD from hemp and you can extract THC from marijuana. We can use marijuana to extract both CBD and THC, which gives us potential production cost efficiencies. And our goal is to achieve full production capacity at our licensed 5-hectare cultivation site by the middle of 2020. In phase 2, we're planning to do what we do really well, which is go outdoors. As we're Emerald Triangle, Oregon outdoor growers, and that's really what's in our wheelhouse. And we're planning to implement a 200-hectare outdoor cultivation zone. Conservatively, we'd look at probably doing 25, 50, and 100 hectares. Andreas will talk a little bit about that. We have a lease option on 200 hectares to the immediate northeast of our 5-hectare licensed cultivation site. The Lesotho authorities have awarded us a conditional license in support of this expansion plan, and we expect to commence site preparation work for this phase 2 towards the end of Q2. But right now our heads are down and we're fully focused on phase 1 implementation. As previously announced, upon completion of this transaction, we're expected to appoint Ms. Louisa Mogela to the board of directors as our new chairman. She's one of South Africa's most influential and successful businesswomen. She is the co-founder of Bophelo and is expected to become the first African woman to lead a publicly traded cannabis company. In terms of project funding, what I discussed earlier is that Louisa has provided us with a secured term loan of $1 million to initiate phase 1 growth. The loan carries a simple monthly interest rate of 1.5% with an 18-month term. The loan was funded in South African Rand. I want everyone to realize that the prime lending rate in Lesotho is currently 12%. To fund the remaining working capital requirements for delivery of phase 1, we're in advanced discussions with several large commercial banks in South Africa concerning the provision of conventional lending facilities. Halo expects Bophelo to secure conventional bank funding in Q1 of 2020. In addition, Halo can provide funding as needed and has in the past, given the company's current cash and working capital position. With respect to future exports in our pipeline, we are in negotiations with European, Australian, and Israeli licensed cannabis companies for the future import into those regions of medical grade cannabis from Bophelo. To ensure the cannabis grown in Bophelo meets all international statutory and regulatory requirements, we have engaged a European GACP consultant, Pharma Consulta, to secure the necessary certificates for future export. As part of this process, visits are commencing to Bophelo to confirm construction of our greenhouses, our nurseries, and our growing processes are in accordance with appropriate international standards. Halo expects to announce award of the necessary certificates prior to the first cannabis harvest, which will start in and around April 2020. We expect export sales to commence shortly thereafter. Based on current sales prices, the target we have is $4 to $8 a gram against a production cost of less than 50 cents a gram. And we expect to have realized revenues from the exports of Bophelo cultivated cannabis and it to be a significant contributor to our 2020 results probably towards the end of Q2 of next year. Just to give you a little background on Lesotho, Lesotho was the first African country to legalize the cultivation and manufacturing of medicinal cannabis, and it has become one of the most sought after locations for cannabis operations in the world. The country has issued a limited number of licenses since legalization in 2016 and has been exporting cannabis since early 2018. Lesotho is regarded as Africa's premier export gateway for cannabis. The country's drug laws are aligned with all international standards, and Lesotho has established a duty-free trade agreements with all major export markets. From our perspective, there's no better place than Lesotho. Sort of like when we picked Oregon initially in 2015, thinking US legalization would come much sooner. In the same light, we picked Lesotho, thinking that from our perspective, given our culture, the way our company operates, it's actually the best place for us to operate. It's a politically stable country that has an established cannabis culture, low taxes, low employment costs, and it's a country that cannabis can really uplift, and we're really pleased to be a part of that. And thanks to the country's existing trade deals and adherence to international standards, Lesotho will, act as our gateway to the cannabis world outside of North America. A little bit about the transaction overview. Pursuant to the purchase and sale agreement dated November 27th, Halo is a purchaser and Bophelo Biomed Private, GMG Financial Services, and other third-party lenders. We've purchased indirectly 100% of the issued and outstanding capital of Bophelo by way of 45% of the shares from Bophelo and 100% of issued and outstanding shares in the capital of Middleton Garden, which holds the remaining 55% shares of Bophelo. We've also agreed to acquire receivables and certain debt claims by Bophelo to each of Bophelo and the third-party lenders. As consideration for the acquisition of Bophelo shares and the Bophelo debt claim and third-party debt claims, we're issuing 43,712,667 common shares in the capital of Halo. And we're paying out such number of Halo purchase shares that is equal to the aggregate amount owing under each of the Bophelo debt claim, the third-party debt claims, divided by the closing share price being the greater of the amount equal to the volume-weighted average trading price of Halo common shares for 20 consecutive days, immediately preceding the trading prior to the closing of the transaction, or the minimum price pursuant to applicable securities laws and the requirement of the NEO exchange to Bophelo and third-party lenders. And respectively, second, by paying out 2,039,333 shares to GMG and other third parties by issuing 45% and 55% of the remaining Halo purchase shares to Bophelo and GMG respectively. In addition, we've also agreed to issue 2,039,334 Halo common shares in connection to GMG with helping us negotiate and arrange this transaction. Pursuant to this agreement, the parties have agreed to provide customary representations and warranties and to perform customary actions during the period between signing and closing, including negotiating and executing an escrow agreement in which the parties have agreed that 15% of Halo's purchase shares that we're giving them will be held in escrow for a specified period, and non-competition agreements with certain of the sellers or vendors. The closing of this transaction is subject to customary conditions, including receipt of all necessary approvals, including local Lesotho regulatory approvals, The transaction is expected to close in Q1 of 2020. That being said, we're actively going full force right now with everything at the site. Concurrent with the execution of this agreement, Bophelo's entered into the loan agreement, which I described, with Ms. Mosella, pursuant to which Ms. Mosella has already provided a $1 million secured term loan. Okay, so that covers the agreement. I think the next phase is for Andreas. We have a bunch of questions that have been fielded to us. The first one Andreas is going to answer, provided that his mic is working properly. So I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to grab the question sheet here in a second, and then I'm going to turn it over to Andreas to answer the first question. Okay, let me find it. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, all right. So Andreas, this is for you. That certain reports have shown that we are projecting once the outdoor grow is up, potential revenue of 800 million USD from just Lesotho. Can you give the specifics of how we compute that and a little bit of color on the roadmap of how we get there?
Right. Can you hear me, Kieran?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly, and I'm going to mute.
Wonderful. So to answer that question, it's really some very simple numbers. And to give you all a basis on how we come up with these numbers, we have arguably the largest contiguous grow in Oregon, which is about 6 acres. Let's call that maybe 3.5 hectares already. So we have some experience with large scale growing of cannabis. And so the numbers I'm about to give you are actually conservative compared to how we're doing at that grow. If we grow 100 hectares with 7,500 plants per hectare, and then get 1 pound, which is about 225 grams per plant, which is a very small number. In Oregon, we'll typically yield about 3 pounds a plant. That gets us 750,000 pounds in the harvest of the outdoor harvest at $2.50 per gram, which is significantly smaller than the numbers Kieran stated earlier. That gets us to about an $850 million harvest per season once we're up and running across the board.
And then, Andreas, why don't you talk a little bit about the roadmap and the geometric progression that we have to undertake to get there?
So the numbers I just gave you follow a 4-step process, and we're in step 1. Step 1 involves what we call strain hunting. Right now we have about 1,000 plants growing from one strain, Candy Kush. That strain is very strong. It's perfect for the Lesotho climate. It's adapting very well. We have 1,000 plants of that. We're about to plant another 150 seeds of 12 new strains, and that will take us to 13 total strains growing. We'll have about 2,000 plants in the ground as we go forward. From those 2,000 plants and those 13 strains, we will get a harvest, but before we harvest, we will clone each of those plants for a total of 10,000 clones, about 1,000 of each strain. And once we do the harvest, we'll know which of the plants produce the best. And from that point on, we'll start using those as the mothers to go to the second phase. So we'll fill up a single Cravo greenhouse, which is 1 hectare. We'll crop that out this year. We'll get 2 harvests this coming year in the next 12 months. In the meantime, there will be 4 more Cravos going up, which will use the first Cravo to populate those 4. You typically use a 3-to-1 nursery to grow stock. And so with 4 Cravos, we would have 1 that would serve as the nursery. We'll have 5. And once those all grow out, after we get the harvest from the 5 Cravos, then we will be prepared to use those 5 Cravos to expand to 15 hectares. Again, 3-to-1. So 5 Cravos to 15 hectares of outdoor. And then the fourth, that would be the third phase, which would give us a 15 hectare outdoor grow where we're expecting, I believe, 125,000 pound harvest. And then that would take us to step 4, where we then go to the 100 hectares. So we go from right now maybe 1,000 square meters to a hectare, from a hectare to 5 hectares, 5 hectares to 15 hectares, and 15 to 100. So that's generally what we call the geometric progression. And all along, what we're seeking is the best producers from the strains that we have. And I want to reiterate, the initial strain, Candy Kush, has been performing phenomenally well, beyond expectations in the climate there. Our climate is perfect.
All right, thank you, Andreas. Okay, so the next question is for me, and someone asked, what is the benefit to make Louisa Magella your chairwoman or chairman? And first and foremost, I have had the pleasure of working with Louisa almost on a daily basis for the last 6 months. We've spent, I'd say, hip to hip with Louisa, Andreas, and I, along with our executive team, in the United States and in Africa, probably 3 to 4 weeks. Louisa has visited every one of our sites in America, and we've, both Andreas and I have spent significant time in Africa, and we've worked together really well. Louisa, by way of background, grew up, is Basotho from Lesotho. She grew up during apartheid. She was actually the first black person to be a teller in South Africa during those times. And she actually, came, as apartheid ended, Louisa became a very successful businesswoman. She has had her own company. It's called Wiphold. You can look it up online. I think it has assets under management of about 220 million US dollars. It's principally for the empowerment of disadvantaged women. And she has multiple projects around the world through that company. Louisa was CNBC in 2015 African Businesswoman of the Year. Louisa has sat on the board of Sasol, has sat on the board of South African Airways, has sat on the board of Sun International. She's very experienced. She is very opinionated, and she actually is a very good guider and mentor to both Andreas and myself as the executive team. In terms of our board, she's already attended as a guest one extensive strategic meeting. It's interesting to note that all our external directors, Fred, Peter, Andrew, and Louisa, are older. They're older than me, and I'd like to say that they're wiser than me as well. And so Louisa brings just a wealth of experience. She's also very culturally, obviously, having being Basotho and having grown up in South Africa. She is very, how do I say it, besides being successful, she's been very, very helpful and hands-on in the village. She's there with us side by side as the tractors are rolling and the ground is being graded. She's there with us as the wind is whipping up the dirt. She's side by side with us. She's up with me at 4 in the morning, hopping flights to Cathedral City from Medford, Oregon. And I couldn't be more happy both for our shareholders and the company that Louisa is joining us. Okay. The next question is, do you have any projections of the costs to get the outdoor growing going in Lesotho? How is the soil? What are the security requirements? Please talk about the environment. Andreas, can you handle that question?
Yes. So that's a great question. First of all, in terms of the costing, the security, the soil, I'm again going to use the basis of our expertise growing 3.5 hectares, 6 acres at East Evans Creek as the basis. I believe we're already producing for under that price per gram at our Evans Creek grow, and we believe Africa will be even less expensive because labor is much cheaper, and the majority of our costs to grow are labor costs. So we haven't actually put the full projections together yet for the grow in Lesotho, but I expect it to be less than 50 cents per gram, probably substantially less. With respect to the soil quality, we have probably over 500 hectares to choose from. Every single hectare has been had a soil analysis. There's more than one kind of soil. There's probably 15 different soils in the area. And from what we've seen so far, our site has some of the worst soil that you could imagine growing there. And where we put water, the soil is very receptive to growth and to regeneration. Where we've applied some water, there are weeds growing there. And as you know, we're growing weed. So the soil in and of itself is already pretty good. And that's the worst of the soil. And there's some extremely rich looking soil. So I have no concerns whatsoever about the ability to establish a healthy soil ecosystem there with typical organic methods. And so there's really no issues to look at there. In terms of security, we're going to use the same security protocols in Lesotho as we do in Oregon. I think having been in Lesotho, I don't see that the security environment is any worse than in Oregon, and we have very robust security systems in terms of cameras, 24/7 security, those kind of things. So I'll go a little bit more into detail about the soil. It's a little bit heavy in clay, but like I said, it's extremely good. It's an excellent farming region. If you go across the border to South Africa, it's a major farming area. It's a grain belt for Africa. So this is fantastic soil. We have ample power. We will need power for supplemental lighting. We have, I think, a 120 kilovolt line within a kilometer of the site. There'll be plenty of power. The water, you need that for growing. We're in the process of establishing some 1 million liter holding ponds, which will actually have fish in to condition the water. We believe the water is very good, and there's plenty of it. And in terms of our genetics, the plants themselves, like I said earlier, we have fantastic response. And I think the most important thing is we met with the Deputy Prime Minister, and they have a plan for their special economic zone, for which cannabis is, we should say, the tip of the spear. And basically, the government is very supportive to not only helping us make this grow fantastic, but actually changing the area around our grow site, recreating a dam so that Lake Sokolo will be full again, which will create kind of a wetlands environment. Overall, the environment, the soil, the area is perfect, and we have everything we need to be very successful growing there.
All right. The next question has to do with the demand specifically for cannabis from Lesotho. Someone asked the question, why would someone purchase cannabis from Lesotho at a similar or even a little bit lesser of a price than cannabis produced in a first world nation like Portugal or Spain?
Well, you know, it all comes down to your genetics and your growing practices. And I would challenge any grower anywhere on the planet to compare their genetics to the genetics we're growing. Our genetics are proven for 30 years. A lot of them are original strains from Humboldt, and they've just continued to be improving over time. We've been growing for 5 years now at East Evans Creek in one form or the other, and we've produced fantastic cannabis. In fact, this year we had a number of dispensaries actually give us money in advance to secure our crop because we have such a good reputation in terms of the strains that we grow. So we know how to grow high quality cannabis, and you take those strains, you put them in a great environment, they're going to be perfect. And although we have not been involved in this activity, you have to remember that the strains that we're growing here in Southern Oregon that have been grown in Humboldt have been distributed throughout the world, particularly the United States, the East Coast, via black market means, but also throughout the world it's a famous Humboldt genetics, which is effectively what we're using. Southern Oregon genetics are world famous. So we have the genetics, we have the growing expertise, and we have a great environment. So it's very easy to believe, or I'm 100% confident that Europeans, Australians, anybody in the world is going to buy the material that we grow because it'll be of such high quality.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. Okay, the next question I'll answer. The future seems bright for your Lesotho operation. What is the reason that you are also moving forward in the US as well? What is your focus now? So right now, as we've said in our press release for our Q3, and as we've said in our MD&A, right now our primary focus in the short term is California, and in California to look at getting stranded assets or assets that are undervalued given current market conditions, and putting together a vertical integration strategy in California. You know, as we said, we're looking right now, we've now established a base in the Emerald Triangle in that Humboldt Mendocino region to secure cannabis. Inevitably, we're looking at cultivation sites like we have in Oregon, again, along the same cultural lines as we currently grow, which would be outdoors or hoop house or greenhouse. Then we are looking also at dispensaries right now in California, and to integrate vertically along those lines. The one area that we're not looking to integrate into is distribution or running the milk routes or the trucks to the dispensaries. That is, in our minds in California, it's a very large place, and that is a very capital intensive operation. We work with NABIS on that. A lot of people have asked us, you know, it seems a little strange for us to go from Oregon, Nevada, and California all the way to Lesotho. But to give you some perspective, Lesotho is a lot like where we come from, which is the Emerald Triangle, where it has a deep history of cannabis, and cannabis is embedded in its culture. And so it is a very, very, to us, it feels like home. If you'd said to us, go to Michigan or go to Massachusetts, which are indoor environments, which historically have not done this, it's very different than Lesotho, which is much more, when we go there, it feels to us just like Southern Oregon in terms of climate, in terms of people, and in terms of culture. It feels to us like Mendocino. So to us, it's very much of our focus, and it's very much within our ethos. Okay, so the next question was asked, what is the situation in South Africa? Is cannabis legal there, growing cannabis? What's going on with Lesotho and other countries in Africa? Are they following suit? Is it possible to export from Lesotho to South Africa? So South Africa has decriminalized, and that is under court order. It is my belief that also under court order, South Africa is supposed to legalize, which in our terms means recreational legalization. I believe that there's already medical legalization there, and decriminalization has allowed for people to grow on their own without being, for their own personal use, without being prosecuted. South Africa has 60 million inhabitants, or approximately. It is one of the larger countries in Africa, particularly economically. And yes, it will become I believe it'll become a attractive market for cannabis companies. That being said, we are not envisioning any exports from Lesotho to South Africa at this time. Right now, it's only medicinal cannabis we can export from Lesotho, and our focus is into Europe, Australia, and Israel at this point. Will other countries follow Lesotho? I mean, we're focused on Lesotho. Again, I keep emphasizing how it's culturally similar and the growing style is similar to what we're used to. But yes, I believe that other countries, I've heard that there's medicinal cannabis regimes being put up in Uganda. I've heard that there's medicinal cannabis in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've heard Zimbabwe as well. And I've met actually people from Zimbabwe who are growing. I mean, from our perspective, our focus is Lesotho and the Basotho people, and just keeping our heads down and making that successful, because that's more than enough of a large project for us. The next question is, how important is your relationship with the government and the king, and what is Louisa's standing with the king and government? So Louisa is part of the royal family. She is a relative of the king. However, in Lesotho, it is a constitutional monarchy, so Louisa is not active in government, nor has she been active in government there. Our relationship with the government there is a good relationship, I would say. You know, we've promised certain things, we have to deliver. The government has a vision of making the Mafeteng region into the first, what's known as agropole of cannabis and cannabis related activities on the African continent. And what that means is that effectively, if you look at India 25 years ago, before IT got a hold of India, there were vast farmlands, let's say outside Bangalore and outside Delhi and outside Mumbai and Hyderabad. And now those are filled with IT parks and malls and people and residences. And the concept of the agropole in Africa and the concept of the agropole in particular in Mafeteng through the special economic zone is to actually build this sort of structure over the next 5 to 10 years in the Mafeteng region and make it a sort of a cannabis hub. And so that's, I think that answers that question. This is a question, I think, for Andreas. Is a 50 cent per gram production price truly realistic to process or manufacture finished cannabis? Do you expect any import duties for your product in other countries to protect local growth there? I can answer the second part of that question. Right now, there are no import duties for cannabis to other countries. There is the UN treaty that some of you are aware of, and Lesotho, remember, is not a wealthy country, and it has a number of bilateral treaties. We cannot foresee the future to see if import duties will be imposed, but currently there are none. I'll let Andreas answer the first half of the question.
Well, I certainly believe we can grow for less than 50 cents a gram because we're doing that right now in Oregon, and the labor rates are probably 3 or 4 times as high in Oregon as in Lesotho. So it's the yields. It'll all come down to yield. There's no reason to believe yields are going to be worse. So I believe we're easily going to be under 50 cents per gram.
Okay, great. All right. So then the next question is, we've seen environmental issues having destroyed other harvests at some of our outdoor competitors. Do we have any issues with pesticides, with storms, with locusts, or any other sort of issues that we're fearing now that we've spent time there on the ground, obviously? So, Andreas, you can answer that.
Yeah, it's a perfect growing climate. It's not as harsh as Southern Oregon. in terms of heat in the summer. It's not as harsh as Southern Oregon in terms of cold in the winter. It's more like a California climate than an Oregon climate, and Oregon's a perfect environment for growing. So in terms of the actual environment, no issues whatsoever. There's a fear of storms and hail. We have very strong and severe thunderstorms every year, and they roll through, and a little bit of damage to plants. But you have to go back to the fact that if people are losing their crops in a new country, it's not because of the environment in Lesotho. It probably has more to do with strain development, strain selection. Our strains they're not small little plants. They like to grow into 3-meter tall, 10-foot tall trees that are very strong. And what we always have to remember is the cannabis plant is extremely resilient. It's not a little baby plant. Doesn't need to be babied. It responds very well to care. It's a very tough plant, and I have zero concerns about hail, windstorms, whatever. Our genetics has faced all of these things, including frost, and I have no worries whatsoever.
Okay. There were one or two questions along these lines, and it was asked that will the Lesotho revenue and expense be recognized 100% under Halo's financial statements, and is there any minority interest? So the way we've structured the deal is that it will be fully consolidated and there is no minority interest. It actually rolls up through our parent. And when we file on CDAR, the structure will be very clear, but it's 100% structure. So hypothetically, the question was, if Lesotho produces 100 million in revenues in C21, will it fall on our revenue line? Absolutely, it will. This is actually a very good question. I believe the expectations at 50 cents a gram, do they include transportation, regulatory, customs, shipping into Europe and Israel? What we've envisioned in that 50 cent a gram is to be able to actually send with that price, to send that via charter. So what we're really thinking is that we would probably have 10 cents per gram in transportation costs if we have to charter to send product. Are there any additional steps to secure licenses? No, our license is complete, but I want to emphasize that our growing, our outdoor license is a conditional one at this point. Okay, so now we can open it up on the floor. We have another 10 minutes before we hit the hour mark. Can we, why don't we look at some questions? I think Cody, you're farming some questions for us and gonna pop them on the screen. So, okay. How does 50 cents per gram production compare with other producers? That's a good question. I think, Andreas, where are we at in Oregon right now, fully processed for sale to dispensaries? I think we're at around, what, 30 cents right now? Or
I think we're between 30 and 40 cents.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so I think 50 cents from our perspective, which is, you know, an Emerald Triangle cultivator, it's a conservative estimate, but I know that if you're looking at like Bedrocan, who's also operating in Lesotho, they're indoors. So I would expect the guys who are indoors like them, they're the only ones I think are indoors. I believe Meta Grow, which is Supreme, which is a Supreme joint venture, I believe their greenhouse as well. So I would say that they would probably, the greenhouse guys would probably be where we're at. And the indoor guys obviously will be higher. You know, it just depends on your style, and our style and our plant style tends to be larger, and our genetics tend to be larger. So we get efficiencies through size. Okay, next question. Will flower be sold, or are we focusing on extract specifically? Oh, this is actually a really good question. So there's this sort of motto when we went to Lesotho, and we said that we have to, and this is part of this geometric progression. So, we have to crawl before we walk, walk before we run, and run before we sprint. And so we think that just getting GACP certified material for export as a first step would be a major win, and it's extremely profitable. At the same time, the government in the Mafeteng region has identified a very large facility, which was a former textile mill that they've cleaned up, that would act both as a drying facility, and B, and I've put some pictures of this online, and would inevitably act as a great facility for extraction. But I wouldn't expect any sort of sales from oil, at least for another year. And the reason being is that when you export oil internationally, it has to be under current good manufacturing practices, which is a very high standard. And there have been two guys who have been aggressively going for this in Lesotho, one being Medigro and the other one being Verve. Medigro is a Supreme joint venture, and Verve is an Afria project. And so our thought process right now is to export flour and biomass for extraction, and potentially even sell biomass for extraction to Medigro or to Verve as we begin producing it, since our cultivation is going to be, at this point, planned to be much larger than theirs. Will I be buying more shares personally? Of course, I'll try to buy more shares personally. The issue with buying shares right now is that, we announced earnings, we've been on hold, and I'm still on hold because we have, we still have some material news potentially pending. But I assure you, when I get out of hold, I will be buying shares personally. As you know, Andreas, Philip, and I, we take our compensation in shares, and that's what we do. We believe in the stock. We believe in the company as founders. Okay, all in total deals to close this. So this is from Andy Edwards, and he said that we're issuing 40,786,667 common shares. How many additional shares are being issued for consulting and other all-in shares to close the deal, he's asking. So what I said in the press release, which is towards the second page of the release, under transaction overview in the fourth paragraph, there are another 2,039,334 shares being issued to Geneva Management Group in connection with an arrangement fee to put this very complicated deal together. So yes, in addition to this, there are another 2,039,334 shares being issued. Okay. Okay. I think that's it, unless there's any more questions. Wait, there's one more coming. No, that's it, it looks like. So, there was a question about a price per share. So on this transaction, there isn't a price per share. There's just a number of shares, so it's not subject to price fluctuation. What strategies are you implementing to compete with the black market in California? The whole thing is, in Oregon, and in California, obviously, there's a large black market. But when we factor in pricing with our products, be it our shatter, our live resin, our vape cartridges, we've always been in the value end of the spectrum. And so we take into consideration black market pricing. That being said, there seems to be recently a massive eversion to the black market, considering that, that there have been reported issues with vape cartridges and black market product that has led to serious health consequences. So it doesn't factor into our calculus as much as it did 6 months ago. Okay, we are now 1 hour in, so I think this would conclude the call. Thank you, everyone, for participating and listening to us for this 1 hour. We look forward to future calls. Everyone, have a good weekend, and for all the Americans, have a good Thanksgiving holiday. Bye-bye.